funny because as a Christian, we're told to put our former selves to death. Well, now as a former Christian, I'm putting my Christian self to death. But what did Paul say? I die daily.
I would still find myself prostrate in deep thought, even though I wasn't praying.
Wow, that is amazing.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's, for me, it would feel like they're trying to resurrect the me that I'm trying to put to death.
Right.
Having gone through something that was pretty much a big deal for you very recently. If you had people who said, "Can I pray with you?" What was that like, and how did you deal with it?
But it was hard. It was. I don't know, Jay Wood, if you had a hard time doing it, but for me, it was pretty hard. But I had to really muster enough effort to.
I was frankly pretty emotional. I had to like fight back tears. Where you're considered less rude. Okay, I'll let it go because I can already.
No. It's a good conversation, but I disagree with you.
I'm gonna let you start discovering over the years, even sometimes, how messed up something that you believed previously was that you didn't even realize when you left.
Yeah. Well, welcome to Ichabod. I'm your host, Be Good, aka Brady Goodwin, joined as usual by Albert Kim and Jay Witt. I feel like Jay Witt is normally down on the bottom. Now you're up in the corner on top.
Yeah.
You're kind of triumphant right now, Jay Witt. So
we up. We up. It's up and it's stuck, man.
Selling on a corner.
Okay, here we go.
Welcome to Ichabod, Joe. I don't know what number episode we're at anymore. Stop counting. I do got to get back to counting so that when we get close to our 100th episode, we can celebrate. But until then, just ride with us. Tonight's episode, what are we talking about? Well, we're going to actually dive into, I think, oh, I forgot. Jay Witt wanted to come on with a video clip. Let me pause for a second.
Right? Yeah, but Lomax is dead. He's not around anybody anymore.
I know that. You know that. Nobody else knows that.
Oh! Where's Bernie? It looks good enough. Let's go.
Uh-oh. Larry, what? Huh?
Oh. Really?
Hi, Bernie. Hey, Bernie, just like last week, huh?
Oh, Bernie, you animal, you are insatiable.
Doesn't anyone realize he's dead?
Roll the boat! Got him? On the boat!
Vito, I'm telling you, Lomax is alive.
For those who are not familiar, that's I think it's like the 1980s classic, Weekend at Bernie's. And we're not trying to offend anyone, but each of us, we were talking about what is it like to be living a post-Christian life, to be a former Jesus worshiper, like, can you just flush all that away? Can you just hit a button and have all of your thoughts of Jesus, have all of your scripture references, the worldview, the grid through which you saw the world? Can you just hit a button and just see that go away? Or is there a sense in which, even though you're still alive, you're still living and moving and having your being, you almost feel like you're carrying around with you this extra person? But it's not a living person. It's a person that, as far as you're concerned, this person is dead to you. Dead to the world, but you have this sense in which you have to carry around this person, and it's up to you to keep this person alive. The Christian knows something about this. We'll talk more about that later, but the non-Christian, the former Jesus worshiper, if you don't allow us to be former Christians, these former Jesus worshipers, we know something about carrying around this body, and I think it's the Apostle Paul who says, who will deliver me from this body of death? Well, the former Christian says something similar, but don't mean it the same way. So fellas, we're going to talk tonight about this, this feeling that you're carrying around this extra body, And what does it take to get rid of it? Do you think you can ever get rid of it? So I'm just curious. I'll start off asking Jay Witt, can you relate to feeling like you're carrying around? This is another example of carrying around this. Jesus talked about the Pharisees, right? He said they were whitewashed sepulchres full of dead men's bones. But there's a sense in which, well, I guess I'm wondering, Jay Witt, for you, can you relate to that? Does that sound familiar, or is it like, nah, that's somebody else's experience, not mine?
Yeah. Well, I think I can't resist this portion here, which is recognizing the nature of flipping something so I think it might be helpful to first acknowledge what Paul was saying in Romans 7 when he referred to the body of death. That if I may,
Sure.
just acknowledge that was a reference to the war that he said was going on in the believer's body, where they have the old man.
His old body was the body of death.
Yes.
Or his physical body is the body of death.
Well, it wasn't the physical body. It was talking about the war. It's almost like the angel on the one side and the demon on the other side. The war of the different minds, the new mind and the old mind.
Yeah, but he says the law is alive within his members. So there's something about his body that's part of the body of death in his vernacular, the way he's using the phrase.
Albert, you want to pull up the passage and read it? That might be helpful.
All right, I'll read it off. This is Romans chapter 7, verse 14. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of the flesh, sold under sin. For I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now if I do what I do not want, I agree with the law that it is good. So now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do right, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inner being, but I see in my members another law waging war against the law of my mind and making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death?
No, you got to read that with some more passion, man. Come on. Oh, wretched man that I am.
It's a little hard 10 years
Damn
later.
me. He's cursing himself there.
O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death?
Keep going.
Thanks be to God through Jesus our Lord, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. But I think that gives us a good.
But no. Let's deal with that blah blah blah. Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then I myself serve the law of God with my mind. So remember he's talking about this inner being, and that's mine. Then he says, but with my flesh, I serve the law of sin. So for him, I think he's grouping his body, his flesh.
Now, Brady, I have to kick back at that.
Okay.
Because the way I was trained theologically, and in certain translations, flesh is rendered sin nature. So they're claiming that this is not a reference to, this is not a corporal reference. This is a reference to the nature. Now
I don't know. He says, I find another law within my members. That's his body.
Yeah, but they're like I said, many theologians would take that flesh and say that it's not literally a reference to.
But that's apologetics at work. That's people trying to get away from the dualism, the Platonic dualism that's in the text, I think.
Let me see. This is an interesting conversation, but
yeah.
Let's see.
And just so people know, this won't go much further because I'm way past the days of arguing about what the Bible means when you start talking about theology. I could care less because we're going to take this term and flip it anyway. So let's get to that part.
But I just don't want people to think that we don't know, we're not aware. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I don't care what they think. They can think that if they want, because we're not. That's not even the point of what we're talking about. Let's flip it to get to what we mean, regardless of what Paul meant.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, because the NIV renders it sinful nature, just so that I remember. Yes, yeah. Okay, that's fine. All right, so, but in any case, this is a thing. People we do this all the time. Something that's real. I mean, let's think. One of the more recent flips is woke. Woke used to mean a certain thing within a certain community. Now it's more or less a pejorative that's used by a different community. Mm-hmm. The N-word falls into that. There are other phrases. I mean, even women they'll be like, she's a bad bee. This is a word that was almost uniformly used in a negative way, but somehow women have embraced it. Some women, that is, have embraced it, and they use it now, and it's a way of defanging it.
Right.
I should say
but
that again. Defang it,
I'll flip. We're not flipping the meaning of something from negative to positive or positive to negative. I think it's negative in both contexts. We're just flipping we're flipping the referent.
Yeah, well, we're actually taking, in the Christian context, they're referring to the way we now think and saying that that's the body of death. And in our context, we're saying that the Christian context is now this. And we're basically saying, there's a way you can draw an analogy here, because in either case it represents a former self that's been left behind, which there are still vestiges or vestigial remnants of that former self in the
you know what? I think I may have been confused, because even with the whole Weekend at Bernie's thing, when we talk about the body of death, I wasn't thinking about the way you just broke it down, which actually I'm like, that makes a lot more sense. You're talking about the body of death being our former Christian self.
Yes.
I was thinking about the body of death being actual carrying around this unresurrected Jesus.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, well, maybe we can kind of explore both ideas.
So we'll talk about.
I like both. I like both.
Al, what did you think we meant when we said body of death? Were you thinking about your old self or Jesus's body being this thing you had to carry around?
I thought about the old self.
Okay, so I was the one that was the odd man out.
No, but I like it because it'll make it a deeper dive. But
okay,
I'm just thinking that the parallel is pretty direct if we take it this way, because you can see that
for sure.
We're just on the other side. It's like, history is told through the eyes of the victor kind of thing. Like depending on what side of this battle you're on, the body of death is one thing or the other.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
All right.
So, but then to my question to you, then, you can relate to this idea of carrying around an extra Jay Witt, or no?
Well, it wouldn't be Jay Witt, because Jay Witt.
Well, I'm only saying Jay Witt because I can't use your real name.
Yeah, no. I'm saying it to say, like, it would be the Saul carrying around Paul as opposed to Paul carrying around Saul.
I don't want to lose people with that. Just an extra
you. You understand what
I understand, but I think it's already a little convoluted. You can relate to the idea of carrying around an extra you, even though it's the former you, but it's still an extra you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
talk about that a little bit.
There's a sense in which, though you go through, I always think in terms of these pictures in my head. I think of the old person who they're old and maybe even slightly decrepit, but they still, their eyes are the same eyes they had when they were a child. They may be, maybe they're more nearsighted or farsighted or something now, but they still see the world and experience the world as the same person they were when they were 5 years old, but now they're 90 or maybe they're 80 years old. And there's a sense in which who you are, I think that's one of the remarkable things and one of the things that a lot of believers have a problem with when you deconvert is that you are you. You're still you. And it's really hard for people to see you being you when they thought that there was this transformation, this huge transformation that happened that resulted in your character being so to see you on the other side with the same character, with the same traits, it's easier to deny that anything happened to you, because then they don't have to come to grips with the fact that you were always you, if that makes any sense. I know this is
I got to find a way to not have people getting lost in the mirrors that are being held up here.
But I do like the idea of them seeing all of that complexity, because that is part of this whole thing.
But before you talk about other people seeing the you that's still you, maybe it's less confusing to talk about you still knowing like you. Like, so I'll give an instance, because I think this is kind of what you made me think when you said that. There are times when I forget how old I am. And I'll get around younger people and they'll say, yo, what's up, old head? Yo, old head, can you da-da-da? I'm like, Dad, they're seeing my gray beard. They're seeing my, thinned out hair. They're seeing the bags under my eyes. But there are times when I still feel like me 20 years ago. And I'm like, I carry that me around with me and have to remember, I'm not him anymore. I'm this me now. Is that a good example of what you're talking about there?
Yeah, I'm just saying that ultimately, we're all, I don't want to look at it as a trajectory toward some grandiose ending like that, like in Christianity, they talk about glorification and everything, the golden chain, you're headed toward glorification. Life isn't necessarily that, at least in my opinion, but you are you. And you're a composite of everything that you've experienced. Mm-hmm. And in that way, yes, the previous me is with me, and it probably does inform. I've had to unlearn things, and I'm still in the process of unlearning them, even a decade later. Certain ways of judging people and things like that. You find yourself. I thankfully was breaking down some of that even as a Christian before I left. But there are elements of it that are just there. They're kind of deeply rooted just because, I spent a long time in Christianity. So,
okay. Yeah. Al, how about you? Ways that can you see the Christian Al still lingering around, even though that's not who you are anymore?
Definitely. This is kind of a weird thing to talk about in some sense, because I, without getting too much into what's been happening in my life, but I've had some big life events in the last 2 to 3 months, and I think I did a little bit of like this. I've had a few nights where, growing up as a Christian, and when I hit like kind of junior high school, like music became a big part of my Christian life. And so I did this weird thing where it's like I kind of like reverted to that in some ways. So I did this funny thing where I would actually like turn on a VPN because I didn't want any search engine to track my activity because I'm embarrassed by it. And then I just played some old Christian music that I used to really love back then, and then it took me back, and then it almost like it literally transported me to that time, and then I remembered how innocent I was. I remember how what it really comes down to. I think it just highlighted how much I really did believe about God being kind of all loving, compassionate. You read the stories of Jesus and you're so moved by what he does and what he says. And then all these artists and musicians would kind of elucidate that through their lyrics. And, so I was like, wow, I still have that. It's still there plugged in my mind. And then some people out there might interpret that as saying like, oh, see, that's, you have some potential maybe to kind of come back to the faith. And it's like, no, I don't.
Far from the kingdom. You're not far.
I knew Jay Witt was going to come out with a snarky response to this. But
just so you guys know who are watching, we the people on your screen right now, the three of us, will tease each other. Typically, it's Al and Jay Witt, will tease each other whenever something comes out that sounds too much like their former believer self. The teasing will begin. This guy is still a Christian. See, he just said such and such. And so when Al said what he just said, Jay Witt had to chime in. But yeah, so you're saying somebody would hear that and think, oh, you went through something traumatic. You went back to that time when you drew comfort from Christian music.
Right.
And you're saying that doesn't mean what somebody might. What does it mean? How would you sum up what it does mean?
I think it was a very influential time in my life. Without getting into even more details about that, but I did grow up with some childhood trauma, and I think I found in other church members and the Christian message and all of the music that goes along with it, it's like there's something that can kind of fill that gap, right? So, but I don't know, for some reason I had this, like, I just wanted to remember that for some reason. And then I went back and then I did it. And it's very interesting because I'd go back into it and then you get immersed and you're like, oh my gosh, this is what it was like. And then you come out of it and you kind of look back and you're like, wow, that's just not, obviously it doesn't have the kind of pull that it has, but the imprint is so strong in my memory. So that'll always be a part of me. And I think for a long time I wanted to disregard the power it had on me, even just from a psychological standpoint or my development. But for me, it's been a learning process to kind of accept that in me, and it's okay. It's like it's a part of growth, I guess, and it's part of being able to understand why. All three of us can recognize. It's not just a question of are we saved. Like we understand. Like we had the same convictions. We had the same. It wasn't just felt needs. It was like very existential almost. It was very like, we truly believe that it was, the answer to life's questions.
Right.
So
the ultimate questions.
The ultimate questions. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So carrying that around. Yeah, I think I do. And then I think in other ways, there's the intellectual aspect, but there's also the, I've been able to articulate a lot more about, coming out of religion and being able to process that has been like, the thing is, like, a lot of people will find that they can, people who leave Christianity, and then they have their reasons, but that kind of lifelong process to articulate that comes later, and it's gradual, and I was able to do that more, but it's still a part of you. Yeah. Right? Everything that we're talking about here. But it's putting into words and understanding kind of what place it has in my life now is that's been so
I get it online often because I'm very vocal about my deconversion and challenging other people who are still Christians to think about what they believe. And not a day goes by when I post about Christianity that someone doesn't say, why are you still talking about this? Why don't you just go and live your life? And part of my response is, I'm not talking about this for my sake. I'm talking about this for your sake. I have gone off to live my life. Like I could not do this. But then there's another part of me that says, no, I don't even think it would be natural for me to go off and just live my life and not think about this another second. Because I spent 30 years thinking about these things, and not just thinking about them tangentially, but learning to see the world through the grid of the Bible. I spent 30 years doing that. So you don't just unplug from that and then never think another biblical thought. Like, I think it's probably going to be another 30 years of unthinking what I spent 30 years learning to think. Right. So even if I wanted to never think about spiritual things again, never think about the Bible again. Even if I tried to do that, as long as I live in America especially, I think there's certain reasons that I would not be able to go long without thinking about these kinds of things. And whenever these kind of thoughts are triggered, it will immediately draw my attention back to the body of death, this other me that I have put to death. The Christian me, I've put to death. And it's funny because as a Christian, we're told to put our former selves to death. Well, now as a former Christian, I'm putting my Christian self to death. But what did Paul say? I die daily. It's almost like daily I've got to put the Christian me to death, because the Christian me is like, ooh, you don't say those words. Ooh, you don't watch that. Ooh, you don't laugh at those kind of jokes. Ooh, you don't. There's always a putting the Christian me to death.
The second death.
It's the second, third, fourth. It's daily.
Yeah.
Christian Brady dies daily because he lived for so long.
You must be born again. Yeah, you must be born again, brother.
Yeah, I wonder how that sounds to the Christian watching, or even to the former Christian watching. Do you experience this, having to put the Christian you to death daily? And for the two of you, I'm curious, because until you all got involved with me, you guys you spent 10 years, each of you. You chucked the deuces, you chucked the Christian you over your shoulder. During that 10 years was the Christian you peeking up over your shoulder, reminding you about your morality, reminding you about your responsibility to God, to pray about this, to say your grace over your food? Was the Christian you still peeking? And if you say, yeah, it was still there, I'm wondering, does the former Christian you peek up more now that you've been re-engaging in these conversations via Ichabod? So whoever wants to dive in first, answer those two questions, please.
I think of the one brother who I took out, and we were hanging out, and I paid for his meal, and he started to say his grace. I'm like, you need to be thanking me. I think I told you this before, Brady. You want to thank the Lord? You need to be thanking me. It was like, that just made me. I just thought of it when you talked about the grace thing. I do remember that being, because it was so instinctive for me to do that initially. I mean, some of these things, they become so habitual that I remember even when I was in deep thought, I used to be on my knees sometimes, like early on, because I had a particular rug I would be on, and I'd be on my knees, and I used to pray in a very kind of prostrate way too. I would put my face to the ground like they did in the Bible. And I just remember when I had left the faith, this had been such a habit for me for so many years that when I would be in deep thought, I would still find myself prostrate in deep thought, even though I wasn't praying.
Wow, that is amazing.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
wow.
That's
I had my regimen was pretty rigid. I would wake up very early, and I would do the Westminster Shorter Catechism. There would be questions in there that I'd be going through, and I'd have a certain amount of passages that I would be reading, and then later in the day I would focus in the evening on memorization of passages. So there was a sense in which I suddenly had all this free time. I do remember that. And it's easier to just resort to things that you already know when it's hard. It is a hard thing. It took a while. I don't know how long. I didn't time myself, but I do know eventually I was able to shed some. And then I went the opposite direction, where I was somewhat of a, I don't know, I don't want to say lecture, because people might get the wrong idea, but there was a sense in which I was trying to reinvent the wheel of morality after I left, like trying to discover how far I could push things ethically, etc.
Yeah.
And I soon realized that ethics and morality, many of these things that Christianity had claimed a monopoly on, were things that had to do with things that you don't necessarily have to be a Christian to know that they're just smart to do and things like that. So I ended up bridling. I found self-control in certain things. I don't know if what I'm saying is even clear to the listener, but there was a time when I managed to cast this thing off, this hovering sort of, I don't know, former self. I was able to eventually rid myself of it. And then I decided I was going to go in a different direction. I was going to just try to discover my morality by figuring out what worked. Yeah, trial and error. And the school of hard knocks is overrated, and you start realizing that. Yeah.
So Jay, what, you didn't have to do this constant daily thing of putting it off either? You feel like it came to a hard there was a hard cutoff between.
Well, no, I mean, like I say, it's still there in some ways, and it's there more in the way of me realizing certain things from within Christianity, certain maxims and aphorisms. They're still useful. So if they're useful for nothing but a good joke, where, like I said to you, you're not far from the kingdom, Albert. Like I can use them for that, but I can also use them for,
if there is any wisdom, if there's anything,
any virtue,
any virtue,
you're talking to Philippines
think on these
passage.
things.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think particularly the book of Proverbs, some of the things that it would say about hard work and honesty and staying away from, I mean, it's a bit misogynistic because they only present the wayward woman as the person to stay away from, but obviously they're wayward men too, but like certain passages still resonate now, and you're like, yeah, that's wise, They say as a man who grabs a dog by both ears is the man who enters into a quarrel that's not his own. I probably said that in reverse, but the idea is that you put your hands on both ears of the dog, and then the dog bites you. That these are just smart statements. These are wise sayings, and some of those are still useful. Now as a non-believer, those kinds of statements. And so I found myself. I know this isn't quite in keeping with the theme of death and something that's useless, but there are things I've had to sort of sift it, and I've had to separate the wheat from the tare, in a sense.
Gotcha.
The bones from the meat.
Gotcha. Al, for you, 10 years, was it easy for you to not look back? Did it get easier? What were like, and having got involved with Ichabod, do you find the old Christian Al popping up more? Is it harder to put to death the old Al, or what's it been like?
Yeah, it's obviously it's not a switch, at least for me. And I think I spent the majority of that time trying to forget, because I think I was dealing with a lot of shame about it.
Real quick, shame for what?
Shame for being a Christian.
But I mean, like, why? Can you explain that for somebody?
Well, because it had to do with the fact of how my deconversion took place, because it, from my story is that the more I delved deeper into the, what you would call like the redemptive historical or the archetypal analysis of, the New Testament and Old Testament. And then you would also, and then when I looked more into, what place does apologetics really play in the Christian faith? So, when I, when apologetics, for example, you kind of discover that it really stands on speculation at best, and then fantastical explanations at worst. Then you kind of realize how much of a, if apologetics is built on the foundations of understanding if it's built on on a certain foundational premise that provides the methodology to build the Christian system, then it doesn't have a leg to stand on, because it's extremely shaky. So
So your shame was you were basically, is it fair to say that you were embarrassed for having believed?
I was embarrassed for having to believe in something that has no historical basis at all.
Wow. Okay.
Or very, just extremely, very nimble. And then, so I was getting over that. I think
Okay.
there was that kind of
Wow.
intellectual academic aspect that kind of, and then when I felt shame about, all of the ethical, moral standards I had to, believe in that were arbitrary, based on, a religion that isn't historical. And then you have, a lot of my own, like, you'd be, as a good Calvinist, right? You know how to be very hard on yourself. So, so I was really ashamed about that kind of mentality that I had to, that
Wow.
I struggled to maintain for much of all of my life. So
is it fair to say that you were running from? Wow, it almost sounds like you were running from the identity you had as a Christian, just because of how it made you feel when you look back at yourself.
yeah. Funny, I came out of it, and then you kind of realize intuitively that, like, it's not a healthy way to live your life. It's not it's probably not the best perspective to have in the world.
Wow.
Whatever. And I don't care if you're comforted by partaking in the communion and thinking that, when you hear the words Christ died, Christ came, Christ has died, Christ will come again, right? Those proclamations are made when you take the blood and body of Jesus. But it's, I mean, even then that becomes like like, come on, really, But it just, with all of the comforts that it may give you subjectively, it doesn't outweigh the shame, or it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't account for the shame that I felt overall. But I eventually, worked through. I'm still kind of working through that, but it messed with me psychologically. Gotcha. It gave me wrong perceptions of things, and or very not great ones. And then
Gotcha.
you have to go to therapy and work through all that. So. I remember being fixated one time on, that there's like a psychological kind of category of having pathological beliefs about yourself and things like that, and I had to work through all that, and internally and through therapy and things like that. So, still working through it.
Yeah.
Still, and a lot of what we experience in life is unconscious, right? It doesn't live on the conscious level of, so we talk about all these things on a conscious level, but then how does that impact our experience in life unconsciously? And that's really hard to, it's hard to work through that. So,
I think well, one of the things that might make it harder is you talk about things that happen on the unconscious or even subconscious level. You live in a world or in a country where you're going to inevitably run into things that might be triggers for the old you.
right.
And so some of the things that can just trigger, I don't want to necessarily call it trauma, though I think it could be traumatic. Just think about some of the idioms that we say and hear on a daily basis that could be triggers for a person who left a religion like Christianity in a country like America. You sneeze, somebody's going to turn to you and say, God bless you. And you're not a nice person if you don't say thank you. So now you have to think about, is it unjust of them to demand a thank you for them saying God bless you? that could be traumatic for a person who's left religion.
Or what if you're sick, like very sick, and someone wants to pray for you?
How about that?
Especially in our situation.
Yeah.
You know, how do we respond to that? That's challenging.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
So,
What are some other things
I've been going through some stuff and had people who are believers say they're going to pray about it, and I take it as it's just another way of saying they wish me well, and so I accept well wishes from anybody. I don't,
Okay, you accept well wishes if they say, "Can I pray for you?" or "I'll be praying for you." But what if they say, "Can I pray with you?"
Yeah, like right then.
I've accepted that. I've accepted that.
You've accepted that. Okay.
Because I was at a church. One of the last times I went to a church, and a pastor, a friend of mine had relayed to the pastor that I was going through something, and the pastor was like, "Oh, can I pray for you?" And I was like, "Oh, sure." I mean, what am I going to do in that situation? Are you going to say no? I don't know.
Well, in a church with a pastor, that may be different than one of your friends on the phone saying, "Hey, Jay Witt, I heard what you're going through. Can I pray with you now?" What do you do in that situation?
I can't answer that. That hasn't happened.
Okay.
But I don't believe I would make it awkward for them if they felt like they really wanted to go there.
Right.
Look, like for me,
that's surprising.
If you really believe something is not real, all right. It's one thing if I actually thought it was real and it was going to have some deleterious effect on life or something. But if it's actually literally just make believe, the only harm in me submitting to that would just be, it would have to do with my disposition personally. And I feel like the lighter I hold these things, in terms of the less conflict I can have in life with people about things that aren't real, the better my life is. So I'm not the kind of person who wants to spend time arguing about whether Trump won the election. I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to sit around and argue with you endlessly about the artificiality of your religion. If you really think that,
but if someone said, "Hey, Jay Witt, sit with me, help me write a letter to President Trump to move to, I want him to try to get Congress to stop supporting the Ukrainian war, the war in Ukraine. I want him to stop supporting Ukraine. Help me write this letter to Trump."
I think that's a little different than somebody saying, "Hey, first of all, we have to establish this has never happened, because most people are smart enough to understand that if you set a boundary and say, "I don't believe this anymore," they will go off to their corner and say, "Well, I'll pray for you in my own time." It's very rare that I have never run into a person who says, "I'm going to impose it on our conversation and make you pray."
Right.
But let's say I was in that situation. It could go one or the other way. I guess it depends on the day, but I don't see myself being a person who wants to fight. But I also don't see myself as a person who would want to endure a needlessly awkward situation. So I guess it would depend on what my mood is like that particular day. I might be game, depending on how well my day, or I might.
What does it say about me? Because I think my disposition would be, not that I want to necessarily argue with the person, but it matters enough to me to tell the person I don't believe in that. I don't like. I prefer you not. I don't want to pray with you. I don't believe in that. I don't think we're talking to anyone. What does it say about me that I'm willing to have that conversation?
It says that you're a human being who is entitled to your own opinions in ways that you want to live. You have that prerogative in life, So I think each human being. I would never propose my way of being agnostic, atheist, or whatever, as being the only way a human being can be a genuine human being. I mean, you have to be true to whoever you are in that moment. For me, sometimes it's just like for instance, when I was in church and the guy wanted to pray, is that the time to really start having a theological? No. I mean, I took it as he wishes me well. He wants to do what he can, what he thinks he can do to help me in my situation. I know that it's not helpful. But I also understand that it would be more unhelpful for me to just socially. It would be more unhelpful for me to sit.
Let me tie it into this conversation, and I'm going to get Al's take on this. For me, and maybe it's because of how fresh and new it still is to me in terms of deconverting. Like I begin my descent, my ascent I began in 2018 taking my unbelief seriously. But in terms of like really coming out with it, it's only been a couple of years. And so for someone to say, hey, can I pray with you? Not for you, but with you. For me, it would feel like they're trying to resurrect the me that I'm trying to put to death.
Right.
And it would be traumatic to even go through that. So I'm curious for you, Al, without going into details that you may not want to go into just yet, having gone through something that, was pretty much a big deal for you very recently. If you had people who said, can I pray with you? What was that like and how did you deal with it?
So I had a moment recently where someone wanted to pray for me on the spot, and I felt uncomfortable, but I knew the intent was good, so I let them do it. Exactly, but it was hard. It was hard. I don't know, Jay Wood, if you had a hard time doing it, but for me it was pretty hard. But I had to really muster enough effort to.
I was frankly pretty emotional. I had to like fight back tears.
Okay.
Because what I'm going through is serious.
Yeah.
And I was touched by somebody caring. And I remember, I think I talked to you about it, Brady, after I went there, and I remember realizing that one of the big things about church is the community of caring. Yeah. And I noticed that like people would get up and say, I'm sick. Or another person would say, such and such is going on, I need prayer. And I realized these are human beings living together and caring about each other. Yeah. Yes, it's held together by, the cheesecloth of a myth, but they actually care about each other. And that's the human connection is the more important thing in that. And that's what actually keeps them there. And I was like, I realized when I was there, I don't actually have a community of people who care the way they do. Because, this isn't anyone's fault. I mean, it's up to you to build your own community, I guess, in some sense. But they have one.
It's ready-made.
If you walk into the church and you decide you're going to join this group of people, you, in theory, already have. Now, of course, it comes with a lot of other issues sometimes too. But like in theory, you have a group of people. Like you say, it's a ready-made network of caring people.
Yeah, it's a ready-made network of caring people and prayer answerers. To whatever degree they can, like there's so much there. Al, can you?
But there's something powerful about a person seeing you in a situation where your things are out of your control, and saying, "Look, man, I care enough to like voice that to my imaginary God." Yeah. Like even though we know it's an imaginary God, it's like the fact that this person, and sometimes they get pretty caught up emotionally. Just trying to empathize with you. Right. I was touched to the point of I had to hold back tears. I had to actually hold back genuine tears. And it wasn't, like the situation is pretty traumatic, but it wasn't just this. So it wasn't like the reality of whatever they were. It was more just the trauma of my situation and somebody actually being like, look, man, I understand this is hard for you. And actually touching you. The other thing was the person put his arm around me. And was praying for me, and I was just like, I don't know, something about human touch.
I get
in that kind of moment is you feel it.
Yeah, I get it.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Al, can you put words to when you say it was hard to accept that or to be a part of that? Can you put words to why that was hard? And then maybe was there anything like what Jay Witt is saying, but there was something positive in it? Emotionally for you?
It's probably more negative than positive, I would say. Yeah, for me. Whatever percentage of that was positive was heartfelt from coming from me, for sure, and I kind of understood what the intent was and how they. What they're, I had to really tell myself, okay, this is how they express showing sympathy and care and kindness. And so I had to keep telling myself that. But do I want to, if it was premeditated to jump into that, because I was more of a kind of in the moment, but I would never premeditate to be in that scenario again. And I think I like how you phrased it, Brady, there you talked about it. You're kind of like resurrecting that in you. I can't. Yeah, it's just this is all. It's all a fiction, right? So it's just for me being able to utter that coming out of my mouth. It's so weird. It's so interesting. It's really weird. I can't do it.
Yeah,
I can't do it.
I'm sure there's a Christian who hears this and says, see, you're suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. But no, this isn't suppressing the truth. Like we said, like there really is a part of us that was alive that it's almost like, I mean, like we said, like it's putting to death that former self, because that version of me, this version of me that had such a low litmus test for what I was willing to call truth and evidence and reason. Like I don't want that me to live. I'll never forget when this was right around 2021, right after January 6th, when the Capitol building was breached and all that. One of my very good friends claims he was not a Trump supporter, but at the same time was very sympathetic to Trump. And I just remember looking at this person one day saying, you're dangerous. Like the things that you're willing to believe and the things that you're willing to permit. And this wasn't even about a Christian thing, though he's a Christian as well. Certain podcasts that he tuned into, certain people that I felt like, if you're willing to let those kinds of beliefs in, you're dangerous to me. Transfer that to the religious beliefs. I think there are very many people who they're dangerous because of the things that they're willing to believe. And sort of like you being ashamed of your former self, Al, I think there's a part of me that looks at the Christian Brady like, that guy was dangerous. Who knows, what he would, the way he would think about homosexual individuals, the way he would think about women, the way he would think about himself, just like you talked about this very unhealthy view of yourself. Right. And so anything that's going to resurrect that, I feel like I have a almost an instinctive knee-jerk reaction, like, no, I can't let that guy live. Like, I'm not suppressing the truth. It's the truth that helped kill that guy, and that helps put him back in his coffin every day. But I don't want to get too far away from where we were going with this whole idea of this. We were talking about the things that can happen that trigger or that sort of resurrect the old you. You might have somebody say, God bless you when you sneeze, or have somebody say, can I pray for you when you're going through something? And that old you almost rises up. Oh, yeah. Remember that? We used to do that.
God is never far. What do you say in Acts 17, where it's like God is never far from any of us.
No, he's not far from each of us.
Yes.
Well, there's a number of ways where God is not far from each of us, and it's those sayings, and then there's certain idioms just in our culture that you can't escape. And you may not even know necessarily that they're biblical idioms, but they may just be so old and so King James-ish that when you hear them, they put you back in that religious mindset. And I'm trying to think of some. I don't know if you guys can think of just sayings in the culture that trigger the religious reflex.
Oh yeah, I mean we have, like I said, the skin of my teeth. Skin of your teeth.
Wait, skin of your teeth is a biblical reference?
Yeah, skin of teeth. It's a reference to the passage in Job. It says, "My bone cleaveth to my skin, and to my flesh, and I am escaped with the skin of my teeth." That's from Job 19.
Wow.
So
okay.
Yeah.
So we say skin of teeth all the time and may not even know. Anything else?
They're.
I
drop in the bucket. Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know. This is not really a cultural idiom, I guess, but it's the one about the wicked flee when no man pursueth.
Yeah.
But it's
you read what you sow.
You reap.
Yeah, you reap what you sow.
You reap what you sow. Exactly. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some other ones.
I'm sure the audience can think of.
A fly in the ointment. That was another one. Yeah, that's on the.
Wow.
Apple
I had
of
a
the
good
eye.
one. Apple of the eye.
Yeah, that's
I had
one.
a
That's,
good
I think
one.
That's from Proverbs or something like that.
Man after my own heart, or somebody after my own heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's God, right? Talking about David after God's own heart.
I mean, even Genesis. I mean, you're always hearing about the genesis of something. You know, like that comes up pretty often.
I wonder if snake in the grass is referring to the serpent.
It probably
in
is.
Genesis.
It probably is.
Yeah, this is a nice little fun little brainstorm. I'm trying to think of other idioms that people say. Writing on the wall. Writing on the wall.
Yeah. The handwriting is on the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get off the cross.
Get off the cross. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are tons of them. Just on a daily basis, you'll hear these sayings, and they have their root in the thing that you left and are trying to leave. But even as you're trying to leave, there are these little gotcha moments where something's coming at you, reminding you of. And I'm sure the Christians like, aha, good, score one for the home team. But for the traumatized, it's like, ow, like stop touching that sore spot. It's not just idioms; it's also iconography. Where can you go and not see somebody wearing a cross?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're in the inner city, most cities, how many churches are you going to pass as you ride from one city block to another?
Yeah.
I mean, you got to go to a wedding. It's going to often invariably happen in a church. You got to go to a funeral.
Somebody passes, right? You got to go to a funeral. Yeah, you're going to a church. You want people to be, if you have children, you want people to be godparents to your children.
They have people swearing on Bibles in courts, Yeah.
Still to this day?
I don't know if they're still doing it, but I believe
not
so.
all states, maybe, but not all states, maybe, but yeah. It's like,
yeah.
I mean, even the whole idea of taking an oath in our culture is based I mean, just think about it. If you're going to lie, what difference does it make before you lie to say I'm going to tell the truth? I mean, we see it happening all the time. Well, the grounding for the oath was this shared belief that if you made an oath on the basis of something sacred, that was supposed to be something that you wouldn't do even because you guys had to share the belief in the supernatural and the ramifications for swearing in this oath. Now, of course, when you remove the Bible or whatever, it basically is you saying I'm not going to lie. But a person who's not a person who intends to lie might lie saying they're not going to lie because you're going to lie, So it only has power in a culture that respects a book and says, oh, well, if I swear on the Bible or if I swear by God's name and I'm lying, then, a pox is going to be on my house or something,
What other iconography? My phone. My phone conspires against me to get me thinking about religious things. If I type the word please, praying hands are going to come up. My phone is suggesting, is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying? You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't trying to pray. No.
It reminds me of the broken-hearted emoji. The broken heart comes from, was it Psalms 51, if I'm not mistaken? He's near to those who have a broken heart.
Oh, wow.
Let me see. Let me make sure. I think that's there. Let me look.
Those who have a contrite heart, I know that.
Broken
phraseology. That may be more King James.
Let me see. Broken heart. I picked the wrong psalm. It's Psalm 34. So it says, "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit." So that's the contrite spirit and broken heart were the things, but I mixed the wrong psalm. Right. But yeah, Psalm 34. So there's a broken
So when you see the
emoji.
broken heart emoji, you think about the Psalms?
Well, I mean, I'm just saying that these
Yeah.
idioms from the Bible are so woven into the culture that even if you say I'm going to live, I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson who was talking about the phrase or the saying Godspeed, and he was talking about how he uses it now, and people who are atheistic are saying, because they know he's an atheist, they would say, well, why are you saying Godspeed? And he was like, well, it doesn't carry religious connotations for him. For him, it's just like it has to do with the history behind the phrase, and I guess when people made the first mission into space or something, I forget what his explanation was, but for him, it's not religious. It has to do more with being polite.
Right. Sort of like you letting people pray for you.
Or not minding if somebody says God bless you when I sneeze or something.
Yeah.
Like I'll say it to other people, God bless you. It's not that I thought as a believer that, I mean, the origins of that being said when people sneeze weren't important to me even before I became a non-believer. You know,
Right.
It was just
It's cultural for you.
Yeah, it's polite.
Yeah.
It's just being polite.
Yeah. I don't know why I can't bring myself to thank someone for saying God bless you when I sneeze. I almost pretend I don't hear it.
I know why you're rude. That's it. That's it.
Al, do you tell people God bless you when they sneeze?
No, heck no.
If they tell you God bless you, do you thank them?
Maybe. I
Okay.
can't remember the last time.
You guys must be the life of the party. You guys are certainly the life of the party. These guys. I mean, here's the thing. All right, I'm going to oppose both of you guys, like Paul did, to your face. I'm going to oppose you to your face. Look, if you live in a society where you're surrounded by as many believers as we are, and on some level, it's just sensible for just living a life that has less, where you're considered less rude. Okay, I'll let it go because I can already.
No. It's a good conversation, but I disagree with you.
I'm gonna let it go. Yeah, go ahead.
I just think I hear what you're saying, and there's a part of me that respects that, but the part of me that respects that is the part that I'm putting to death. There's another part of me that says I want to normalize atheism, and I think every God bless you and every thank you for a God bless you, it normalizes theism in a way that's already too normal, and I'm very interested in normalizing something new.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to change the world.
Yeah. As a Christian, I wanted to change the world. That part of me is not changed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the one thing about the world you don't want to change is you wanting to change the world. There you go, presuppositionalism for the win.
But either way, you go on social media, and depending on who your friends are, I can't scroll Facebook without seeing 10 to 12 posts about why the resurrection can be believed. And
Wow. Even till this day, still.
Even to this day. I mean, it's changing. It used to
Right.
be 50 posts. Now it's down to, it's in the teens. But still, I can't go online without seeing
No,
Christian
you can't
talk.
go on Facebook. There's a
No,
difference between
even on Instagram, even on my Instagram.
Really?
Yeah. I get triggered incessantly. The reason why I post so much is because I see so many posts that make me want to say something.
Right.
And rather than just be rude and make my comment on their post, I'll just go make my own post. Even though I still do comment on some of them. I try not to. But I feel like I need one of those, those counters at McDonald's that show how many people they've served. I need one of those counters that show how many posts I talk myself out of making because I'm that triggered by what I'm seeing from Christians.
Yes. For the newness of life that you're experiencing. In another 5 years you'll be just as indifferent
I hope so.
as I am.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Brady, you're in a very interesting spot. I think a lot of people can't be in the position that you're in, right? Because you're having to. Well, I can't necessarily say that. Maybe some people can, but I think the way that you're trying to engage from kind of this public discourse, and I don't know how like if you consider yourself to be relatively like fresh or new, kind of coming out, even after that many years. But it is a little different when I think Jay Wood and I when we cut it off, like it was literally the umbilical cord we tried to cut off. And I think being in your position is a little unique. So I get it, I understand it.
I would like to. It's interesting. I would like to take a poll of all the counter apologists and former Christians that are online now. How many of them were non-vocal when they were Christians? Not non-vocal, like weren't sharing their faith, but they didn't have a platform. They weren't, I think most of the ones that I know, they were in some kind of formal or semi-formal ministry. And so when they became unbelievers, they didn't get off the platform. They just changed what they were saying on it. Yeah. And I wonder if that's the difference between what I'm doing and the approach that you guys took.
I wasn't
when you look at Paul, I remember even as a believer saying, like, this is the same dude. Like, I mean, he was going around like imprisoning people. I mean, it's one of the things that makes the story somewhat believable is because it's like clearly he was driven in the same sort of ways. He wanted to, he went around persecuting, then he left and he went around trying to spread the news of what, so yes, Brady, you were going around in gospel ministry, ministering and trying to win people. So it's not surprising that you're and for the people who will be your critics, they say, why don't you just go off into the sunset, I should say. He's just like a reverse Paul. Like he was the same. This is the same guy. If he believes something, he wants to get. Go ahead. What are you saying?
I like what you're saying a lot, and I think it's a different personality from me because I think Brady. I don't know if you think that you share any traits with Paul, but I think it does put you in a unique position, whereas for me, I think in my role, the shame very visibly plays that part because when I was in my Christian in the church and some of the people around me in the secular world, whenever the subject came up about Christianity, God, the Bible, I made a point to get points across. I made a point to even in church, I felt I felt compelled to edify the body, right? Things like that, and have really meaningful conversations, amongst the community and the church congregants. So when I cut it off, and I felt that shame, I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. I think I was just, maybe part of me felt uncomfortable thinking that the people that I had known, who had known me for a while, maybe I was concerned about how it would impact them in some ways, but there was another part of me where it's I'm done with this, and I feel terrible. I feel terrible for holding those beliefs, and then I have to explain it to everybody. Where you seem to do that, and you wrote a book to explain that, but you also had a journey that was a little unusual, maybe, but
and there are parts of that journey that I haven't told. There are parts of the story that you guys know in terms of my deconversion, and sort of like Jay Witt talked about, having this period where you sort of try to test the boundaries of your morality and come up with your own morality now that you're not going to rely on the Bible. There are parts of my story that I think are very interesting, illuminating just into the process of, okay, if not that, then what? And they helped solidify that I was putting the old me to death, because the old me was not going to be living this, the way that this new me was living. But it's interesting because I don't know, if I were to spend the next 10 years, let's say I stopped being so vocal about my thoughts on the Bible, my thoughts on Christianity, could I look back at my life and eventually, somebody told me the other day, they said, hey, you need to go on Amazon on your author page and change what it says because your author page still talks about you as a Christian. I never changed it. I keep forgetting to. I recently changed my name on social media from fanatic to fanatic. So I had to try to change it. But could I ever look back at my life? Could I tell the story of my life? Would I ever get to the point where I can tell the story of my life and not mention my days as a Christian? I don't know if I will ever be able to do that. Jaywitt, you told a story about a relative of yours that made me think about cutting out a part of my life. Would it even be possible to cut out this part of my life? Would you mind telling that story?
Oh, sure. So I had an older relative. When I was a child, I used to look at his wedding photo, and there was a huge kind of like black spot in the background. And as a child, I couldn't really make sense of it, but because it was an old photo, I just assumed, I don't know, in my mind, the mind has a way, human beings organize things into sensible categories, largely. So you see something like that as a child, and you can't you just say, oh, well, it's an old photo, it probably had some sort of some glitch technically, and it ended up having this large gap in there, some black or whatever. Somehow I explained it away in my head as just being the result of it being an old photo. Well, I later realized that the best man at this particular relative's wedding ended up also being a business partner who had ripped him off really badly. And he was so incensed that he actually cut that person out of his wedding photo. I brought that up as an example of how sometimes when you try to excise something from your life, the very act of trying to take it away, it brings more attention to it. You know, so and we run. Oh gosh, this is a great example. You see it a lot on social media now. So there'll be one social media personality who, some person who's got a smaller platform decides to attack that person so that they can build their own reputation up. And then you'll see the guy who has the larger platform sometimes say, people say, well, why didn't you address it? To address it is to bring more light to it. If I address it, more attention will be brought to it. If I try to excise this thing from my life, the very act of excising it from my life is actually going to make it more visible. If that makes any sense. So when you compare it to this wedding photo, in some ways it would have been better for him to just leave the guy in the photo, but because it had this gaping hole there, he not only preserved he preserved more the pain, because the act of cutting him out of the picture, it is a preservation of the anger that he had. So that very act itself, so the absence of the person from the photo represents, whereas if his photo was just there, he'd be, oh, that was the jerk who ripped me off. But now that he cut him out of it, he's actually preserved his anger toward that person in perpetuity, essentially.
Wow.
It's a really interesting metaphor, or just something. It illustrates something really well. Yeah.
Well, what it illustrated for me is a question I would bring up to you guys. Like, I know because of how vocal, because of how, I mean, it was a career, not just a belief. It was a career for me as well. But it was also a passion. I poured myself into my faith and this relationship with God. I couldn't talk about my life, what I did after high school, and I couldn't talk about my life without referencing this part of my life. But for 10 years, you guys were not Christians, and I guess I'm wondering how hard or how easy was it for you to excise your decades of Christianity from your life? Did you talk about it? Were you able to not tell that part of your life and still come off as a whole person to the people that you were presenting yourself to?
It's very hard. I still struggle with it because there is a good amount of acceptance that I'm still working at in trying to accept that part of my life. It was 75% of my life. So So really being compassionate to myself has been part of the challenge. You know, I used to believe some terrible things. I used to, you know, what I mean by terrible things are, things about other people and things about, just even elements of the gospel, I think are, really just kind of twisted and, to twist a way to look at the world. So I think, and then I don't know, this, what's also kind of weird is being part of the church and being part of, when you're in the church, we all understand what it's like, right? We understand the mentality of feeling like we're a minority in the culture. And so therefore you're having to spend a lot of time and it demands a lot of your time. And so, just like everything, all that. So I obviously, yes, I think I was trying to kind of do that cutout, thing in my life. But I think now I'm trying to actually, I guess that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to put that cutout back in. And then, is that weird?
Wow. Well,
weird,
no,
but
it's interesting. It's not weird. It's interesting
Yeah.
because I'm wondering how, like, what does that mean? Does that mean you coming up with a certain kind of commentary? Like, what does it look like to put that piece back in?
just being able to articulate it to others and myself in a way that doesn't compartmentalize that,
Yeah. Wow.
that. So it's hard. It's hard when you really hate the person you used to be. And and obviously Christians can say the same about the time that
Right.
before they were Christian, right?
Right.
But but that's something where I think that the better when I've been able to accept that a little more, I've felt better about myself.
Yeah.
And I've been able to be. It's a kind of reconciliation, in so to speak, that you're making with yourself, and I think you have to forgive yourself really for that. You kind of do, and you have to
Wow.
to come to terms with all of the relationships that you've built over the years too, and then
Yeah.
because there are people out there that still don't think. They still believe I'm religious because I haven't been very vocal about it. So, but then there are also other believers who know I am, and then there are people I meet, new people I meet. I'm just saying, it's just like everybody has this compartmentalization in their life, but I think as you kind of start to make that connective tissue more, I think and resolve it better, that tends to be better.
You're making me wonder if some of the things that I'm doing, the way that I am online, always sparking these conversations and debates, and is this in some kind of way my process, not to forgive myself, but maybe to, without excising, maybe I am trying to excise the part of me that was Christian. I'm trying to do something.
Maybe that's okay to do right now. I don't know. I don't know. Right? Maybe that's important to do at one time. I don't know.
Yeah.
And
I feel like I'm trying to do something with the old me, and maybe it's like a mental judo, like this Jedi mind trick where I'm trying to like not deny that I ever was, but I'm trying to let the current me be as loud as the former me. So to sort of like maybe even airbrush over, rather than ripping the old Christian me out, I'm going to airbrush over that part and just change the way I look in the photo. So instead of holding the Bible, I'm throwing it down. So it's still me in the picture. It's just a different me. Jay Witt, thoughts on any of this? And also, do you think in any way you did anything like that in terms of cutting out the old Jay Witt so that people don't see the Christian you in the photo, or in what way? How did you represent that part of your life to people in your current life, or did you not even talk about it?
I recently heard that that most people have a hard time waking up early in the morning, like really early, like 5 o'clock a.m., 4 a.m. But I also heard that for those who do wake up in the morning, most of them are very vociferous about that fact. They love to tell people that they wake up early. So there's a sense in which I've been trying to, I think initially I was eager to spread the word of my non-belief. And I think, I don't know whether this is a sign of maturity or something, but I think the true sign of having moved on with my life is it not being the predominant thing. And now someone would say, well, how much control does one have over that? Well, I'm not sure. I can't say. I think it's probably different for every person, but for sure there's some element of that's going to be a part of my life forever.
Now, hold on. I just want to make sure you're answering the question I'm asking, because this is not about whether or not you were or remain vocal about your non-belief. This is about how vocal are you about the part of your life where you were a believer. Do you excise that part of your story?
I mean, well, it's you have to think about it. It's been a decade since I was in there. How often in any other, I mean, sometimes it does come up and people go, oh, what were you doing a decade ago?
Right.
But generally speaking, in conversation, there aren't very many times that you find people after you get out of it for long enough that where that's the question. It's like, what were you doing 10 years ago or over a decade ago? That's just not. Now, if they ask you, are you believe, there are times I'm trying to think about conversations I've had in the last 4 months where faith has come up, and it's come up occasionally. But most times that it comes up, it's not a good conversation, and because people get defensive if they find out that you're not, because
exactly
it's not just that you don't believe, it's you think I'm stupid, not me. Okay, I'm saying this the wrong way because I don't think the listener is going to appreciate what I'm saying. When you say you don't believe, they take you saying you don't believe as you saying that they are stupid.
Yeah.
So then they get defensive immediately. So it's not a neutral conversation. Yeah. Like if they say, hey, are you a believer? If I ask them if they believe, they readily say yes. Okay, fine. There isn't any assumption that I think that they're stupid until I say I don't believe. Because then it's like, oh, well, you think I believe something that's not smart to believe, So then it becomes this conversation that I often find myself trying to get down to the it's always helpful to try to get down to the I think of when they built the Golden Gate Bridge, and they had to get down into the mud, and they had to get down to the bottom of the sediment, to the bedrock underneath of the dirt and sand and stuff down there, and you have to get deep to do that, and then you can establish something to build the bridge on top of. Well, similarly, when you're talking to people about their belief in it, sometimes it's a uniquely challenging thing depending on who you're dealing with, to just get down to a level where you can just have a rational conversation, because there are layers and layers of things, family and whatever. So yeah, I don't want to do too much of be too circuitous with this, but basically what I'm saying is, when possible, I try to avoid the conversation, because if it's going to be had in a way that's fruitful, it's going to be a long, usually, and complex conversation. So because of that, in the way you interact with most people from day to day, you don't have several hours to dig into whatever it is. And if you just don't have the time to dig into it, to me, it's often best to try to avoid it or just speak of it in a way where I summarize it very easy, where I don't give them an indication of how meaningful it was to me at some point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It matters in this sense because there are people who are watching who are trying to see if they could envision themselves being one of the three of us. Could they be this far in their, right now they may just be doubting, they may be deconstructing, they may have deconverted, they may be in the closet as a deconverted Christian, they may be fresh out the closet, and they may be looking saying, could I ever be somebody like one of these guys, this confident, this comfortable? And so we might be their future. They may be looking at their future, looking at us. But then there are people who we are looking at. Some of you who are watching, when you make comments on our videos and you say things like, you've been deconverted for 3 decades or for 50 years, and yet you still find yourself tuning in to podcasts like this and being helped. Somebody said in one of our comments, this was helpful to the, I think I interviewed, when I interviewed Shelton, was it Shelton? Somebody I interviewed. They said, this content is helping them from 30 years ago. And it's almost like, Jay, you used the analogy, the ghost of Christmas future, right? Like,
yeah.
These folks in the comments are showing us that, man, you mean I got another 20, 30 years and I still won't have fully put to death this body of death that I'm carrying around, the Christian me that keeps popping up telling me to think biblically or think about to fear heaven or fear hell or look forward to heaven, whatever it is. I'm just curious, does that prospect, how does that prospect hit you to know that, yeah, you may have been deconverted for 10 years, but you may have another 20 or 30 years of still putting that version of you to death?
Well, I remember a preacher saying that, was it A Christmas Carol was based on the vision of Zechariah. Did you ever hear this before?
No, never knew.
So that might be pretty good to put in here too, because the ghost of Christmas future, where he goes up and he sees his grave, and this is supposed to help him to live his life in a meaningful way in the present. Well, when we see ourselves like that ghost of Christmas future, looking at our older brethren and sisterin who are further along in the non-faith than we are, and we can see that they're still entertained by this. There's an eerie sense in which we're looking into our own futures, and I think it speaks to it. It speaks to the futility in telling former Christians to just go off into the sunset and shut your mouth. Because if you're looking at a person who's, I think someone in the most recent video, they commented and said they've been out for, I don't know, I think it was, maybe they said they were 35 when they stopped, and they were now quite a bit older. And it's just like, when you look at that and you're saying, okay, but this person is still tuning in to hear people talk about leaving the faith. That's, I don't know if there's anything profound to add to what you've said about that, Brady, other than to just acknowledge that this is a reality, and it's like you say, this is that body of death. You carry it with you. And even when I left, I guess this is the one part of the story I didn't tell, because we talk about it like Paul going over to Arabia after he converted or something, like the lost years, you know. Like I just left and I was listening to the Bible Geek. I was listening to what's his face? History in the Bible. There's a podcast, History in the Bible. And I would actually call Albert up sometimes and talk to him, and sometimes find myself just I'd be like, oh, can you believe how messed up this was? It would be something I just, because like when you leave, it's not that you become sanctified in your unbelief. Like you gradually, there are layers to your unbelief. Like, so there's vistas of discovery where you're like, oh snap, that was so messed up. That was such a misogynistic thing. Like I even noted parenthetically how the book of Proverbs is somewhat misogynistic because they're always talking about the wayward woman who's trying to take you off into whoredom or something, but there's no male analogy for it.
Right.
No, this is the thing you don't take into consideration when you're a believer. You never think about that.
Yeah.
But then when you left for a while, or the fact that in so many of the hero stories and the patriarchs, it's a woman that somehow takes them down. Going all the way back to Adam, right? You got Adam, then you got if you just go Samson and Delilah, like you can go through these. I don't want to go down the list of them, but these are things that I discovered after leaving. So I didn't leave because of these things, but when you leave, then you start discovering, man, the Bible is terrifically misogynistic. Like I mean, from cover to cover, they're just hardly. And now, of course, people will say, well, look at the book of Ruth. They're going to point you to Esther. They're going to point you to the handful of times. They'll say Hagar.
Women at the tomb.
Yeah, they'll say the women at the tomb. But that's precisely the point. They're the exceptions to the rule. Like when you go through the text, there's just, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent here, but you get what I'm saying. You're saying. So as you leave, you start discovering over the years, even sometimes, how messed up something that you believed previously was that you didn't even realize when you left.
Yeah. And then you have to wrestle with, like, in what ways did you take in those ideas without even knowing? How did they impact the way that you saw women, the way that you saw yourself as a man, the way it put you up on this hierarchy of patriarchy? And you're like, you're always doing this inventory to see how much of your present mind is still being tripped up by the you that you thought you put to death because it was so, it could be latent. It could just be there underneath the surface because of just how insidious, indoctrination is.
And you spoke about David basically raping Bathsheba, remember? Mm-hmm. Remember that?
Yeah.
You said that was like, I forget how you worded it, but you were like, that was like...
I never looked at it as a rape.
And then it was your mother, Brady, who said,
my mother.
I always knew. I always knew it was a rape.
Yeah.
And you were like, you knew this?
Right. Yeah.
It's like, these are things that you don't think because, it's almost like the NPC episode that I guess we'll do, the non-playable characters. They're these people who are parenthetical to the main character.
Right.
And they just, like, the main character is doing some really effed up S to these people. When we think about things like this, these are things that come to mind, though. When you've left and you keep living.
Yeah.
And then, so the reason why I mention that is because I found myself, as they were, you didn't have anybody to say it to. The only person that you could actually have that conversation with is a person who also was a believer and isn't anymore. And so I found myself calling Albert and talking to him, and Albert being utterly uninterested, and I'm just going on and on and on. And he's just sitting there, and his girlfriend's in the background. They're like, okay, yeah, we got to go eat dinner, And
well, let me just say this, Jay Witt, because I think it's proof that cutting out the former you was traumatic, just as traumatic as having been a Christian was. Trying to cut that former you out was just as traumatic because, if you don't want me to say this part on air, I'll cut it, but I just think it's worth tying it in here. When I deconverted publicly, I hadn't spoken to you in years. And when you saw my deconversion video,
he called me right away. He called me pretty quickly though too. Jay Wood called me when he told me when he saw that video.
Oh yeah. Well, then he called me. Well, no, he hit me up on Twitter.
Oh, that's true.
We finally got in touch. And Jay, I thought he was calling, like, wanted to talk to hear my story. we got on the phone and Jay Witt talked for almost 3 hours and kept interjecting saying, I'm sorry to just vomit all this on you, but da, 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 and just would go back into it. And to me, that was evidence that aside from Albert, you had bottled all this up and you had tried to cut out a part of your life and maybe act like it didn't matter as much as it did. But then, like you said, now finally having another person that you could actually share this stuff with, I just think that's a human thing. We need that. And
well, you sounded interested. The difference is Albert sometimes would be in a very straightforward way, be like, "Man, why are you talking about this?" like Albert, Albert would literally he would voice his disinterest in the topic occasionally, and I knew I was torturing him by talking about it. So you being newly
but it was like
out,
fire
it was like,
shut up in your bones, huh?
Oh my gosh, I could not contain it, according to Jeremiah.
So the great irony, right? I do remember that, Jay Witt. I would say, like, yeah, you're still talking about this. This is not healthy or whatever, right? And then here I am, in this podcast. So
yeah, Brady, you have revived him. It's like preach to the dry bones. Like you have revived Albert, because Albert, the discussions we're having on this pod, I could not have them without. I was totally disinterested.
Well, some of them, yes.
Like,
some
uninterested.
Don't. Yeah, no. Some of them we did, and I was welcome. But yeah, you're right. Not everything. Yeah, in fact, maybe
there was a good degree of
more than half
of lack of interest. Yeah, more than half. Yeah. But I think that I think that having a third person, well, hey, in the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established, right? There's something about there being 2 others for him to kind of bounce off of that. And I think also, I think, I don't know. I can't even quite voice it, but I think that my deconversion was almost simultaneous with Albert's, but it was a totally different kind. And yours is different than ours, but somehow you fill out the 2 of us. And I think in some sense it pulls him in a way that he would not have, because the things I was interested in were different. We've all have, although there's a Venn diagramish overlap between all of our deconversions, they're quite differences. There are things that are quite different about each one of them, and I think it makes for an interesting conversation when there's 3 of us in this, as opposed to me just going down one thing. Because I was listening to the Bible Geek and, like I said, History in the Bible, and be like, "Do you believe this?" And I would just be like, it's like, man, I'm trying to go off and eat some good Korean food or whatever. Like he was not trying to hear it. So this is just interesting. Yeah, it's interesting.
So unless there's any other thoughts, I think it's worth noting. I think this is therapeutic for former Christians. I think this is a look into the future for people who are deconverting and deconstructing. And I hope we continue to be able to do that, to put these episodes up and just have people kind of walk back through and say, oh yeah, that's what it was like. And oh, that's why I stumbled over this. And this is why I still
think
about
the oil
this.
that ran down Aaron's beard. Right?
I think we've had more biblical allusions and references in this episode than any others.
Yes, it's like the oil that ran down Aaron's beard.
Yeah. So have pity on us, Christian, when you see us still talking about issues of faith. This is not a sign that we necessarily, well, not at all, that we're still being wooed or enchanted by the Bible. But I do think there's a good bit of sociology and psychology and therapy that helps us we want to understand ourselves. We want to understand human nature. We want to understand history. That has us still discussing these things. And there's this daily putting to death the old us. And so that's what you're saying. Comments, please comment. You'll see us getting questions and comments in the chat. But I appreciate you guys for tuning in. And Jay Witt and Albert, appreciate your time. We will get back on the next one.